Hello and welcome to an exciting update for SmartLights 3.0. For people new to SmartLights, it's a system that optimizes lights and particles in your scene. It does this by setting your lights to different methods of optimization, which we'll fully cover in this video. Existing SmartLight users, there has been many new features added, such as a new light type called Snapshot. This allows shadows to easily be captured into a light function and change from a static to dynamic shadow based on your FPS or distance. You can now set your optimization method to use distance instead of FPS. SmartEcho can quickly set up zones with ease, and it uses line tracing to set up your zones. There is also creative lighting effects that can be created using this system. This will even work in a top-down game. The light flicker feature can add some realism to your scene for candles, torches, or even get completely creative with it for a strobe effect. Smartlink can also easily spawn particles in your scene, and it'll also optimize them as well. The SmartZone helper tool has so many features to cover, which we'll fully cover in this video, so I welcome you to SmartLights 3.0. Let's go ahead and take a look at the performance increase that you can get by using this system. So we have roughly around about 400 lights and particles that are in this scene on candles and torches and stuff like that that are in here. So you see, if I even look this direction, we're getting about 75 milliseconds. That's like 13 frames a second. But this is disabled, so let's go ahead and we will hit play on this. And let's take a look. So right away we hit play. You notice we're at about 65 milliseconds. That's 15 frames per second. If we kind of look away from those lights a little bit, we can kind of get some of our performance back a little bit. But if we even look in this direction, it's terrible. So as we're running through, all the particles are on. And you can see we're at about maybe 26 frames per second. And let's get to the next room here so we can see what's going on. And again, we look back this direction and we're getting about 15 frames per second. Okay, so let's take a look at with the system enabled now. And if you notice right away, we're at 60 FPS. I got it capped at 60. And all the shadows are still in place here. When I get close to them, everything still casts shadows as it should. All of these test results are on a 2080 Ti, and this is on version 5.1. So if you notice, we take a look, run through here. We're still at 60 FPS the whole time. All of these particles are still on. You can do some creative lighting effects, which we'll cover later in the video there. But you notice you get up close to this, we're still at 60, still cast shadows, and everything looks good. Let's give you a quick overview on what this is doing basically under the hood. So we'll start out with a Smart Light Manager, which is dragged into the scene right away, and this controls all the other lights. We'll cover this when we get into the tutorial section here. But for now, when this is in the scene, you notice down in the corner here, you can set your minimum and maximum FPS goals, and this will take care of it and monitor your FPS, and if it drops beneath this minimum, it'll start optimizing those lights. We also have the new mode now that has just been added. It's distance based, so we're just going to leave this on right now while I demonstrate what this is actually doing here. So distance based, and this is how far away from your player essentially. So to start with, every one of these lights use a thing called Snapshot, which is new. Each one of these essentially has the light baked, or the shadows baked into it. And how it's doing this is it takes a picture of these shadows and applies it to a light function. So you can create your own light functions with these. And all of these have flipped over to the light function now, but when you get close enough to it, it blends back to the original, and you have full dynamic lighting again. I'll demonstrate on this light that's over here in the corner. Jump out of my body here a second, and we'll take this and we'll offset it so we can see that those shadows that are in the light function. Now you wouldn't see this because they overlap each other, but if you go ahead and I get close enough to that, you notice it turns on the actual dynamic shadows and fades out the light function. That's essentially how this is working. Also, for particles, all your particles that are in the scene, based on distance, if you notice the little campfire that's over there, when you get far enough away from it, it'll start optimizing it, and it'll reduce the particles. Now, a lot of people are probably saying, well, you can already do that if you set it right in the particles, on distance. But if you have this system optimize the particles for you, then you can have it measure off of your FPS. So if it starts dropping beneath that, then you can have the particles start removing. We'll cover all that in the tutorial video, but you notice as I'm going closer here, this just blend it. That's how quick it is. It's already blended from its light function to the dynamic lighting here. But if I back up and it starts cleaning up the scene, that's already switched back to the light function, and you can't even tell a difference. Same thing with those all the way down at the end of the hall here. Do you notice that when I get close enough to it, I cast shadows and it blends seamlessly to it. The other thing that this system does as well is that if anybody's messed around with light functions, that the object you're casting the light on itself, if that's in between it, the surface then darkens. So the system will also take care of that and try and brighten those surfaces towards the light back up as well to give that some realism. You notice it just switched back right there. That's completely static. Get close enough, it's dynamic again. So that's essentially what this system is doing underneath the hood. And the basic way of doing it is you can just have it turn on and off shadows if you want it to in areas that are not important, and nobody's going to see the shadows get turned off. But in situations like this with the torch, you're definitely going to see when that gets shut off if we don't use the snapshot feature. And you can see it just shut off and the shadows still look like they're there. Two more things that I want to cover here before we get into the actual tutorial part of the video here. Another thing that you can do with this system now too is under your snapshot you can add in your own basic textures that are down here. This one comes with the flashlight already ready to go, so you can get kind of like a flashlight effect if you wanted to. You also have flickering speeds that you can create like some kind of a strobe effect and everything that we can cover later on. That's kind of essentially how this one's flickering for the torch to give it some realism just a little bit, so that way the light isn't just sitting in the same brightness. It doesn't have any dynamics to it, especially if you got a flame flickering like that. It gives it a little more realism. So with this you can also create your easy way to just use your textures and create a light function real quick. The other thing that you can do with this system though too, that I briefly touched on here in the performance section here, is that you can do some really cool lighting effects. Like in this case, when your character gets close enough to a light, you can do lighting effects such as that. These creative lighting effects can even be used in a top-down game. So if your character walks into a certain area, it'll kind of brighten up the lights. You can do all kinds of stuff with this system. If you wanted a light to flicker, it's a flicker trigger. So essentially, if let's say you're doing a horror game or something like that, and you have some lights that are down the hallway, and you want those, a few of the lights to flicker. In this case, we can just click on this, click directly on the smart light, and it's ready to go. So if your character enters this, then we can have it do all sorts of different effects. So if you notice now I go and touch that box, your lights can flicker. Okay, so let's get the system all set up here so that we can start using the SmartLights system. Now, I tried to make this as streamlined as possible and make this system very, very easy to use. But there is just a little bit of extra functionality that I needed in this system to make it make it a little easier for everybody to use. So there's a plugin, and what you're going to do is you're going to go, you should be in the description on the page itself, but it's the Smartlight Helper plugin. Don't worry, it's completely free, and you can download that, and the first thing we need to do is we need to activate that under our plugins. Then restart, and we can continue from here. So this is for the existing users of Smartlights, and they want to upgrade from version 2.0 to 3.0. This is how you'll actually do this. So the first thing that we want to do is we're going to want to replace these files that are under our Smartlights folder. We're going to assume in this case, which will show you a different work case here in case you've moved this folder. But if you haven't, by default, it'll download it underneath the contents, and you'll have a Smartlights folder here. So this will be the easiest method to do this. Now most people would just go and click and download and have it download right over top of this, but there's a bunch of files that would still be in there that don't really reference anything anymore. So this would be if you want to do a complete clean install to make sure everything is working tip-top here. So in order to do this, you're going to go into your project that you want to update, and we're going to go under our content folder, Smartlights, and if you have any child blueprints or anything that you have created that did not come with the Smartlight system, if you didn't add anything to this folder or anything, you don't need to worry about this step. But if you did, let's say that you created a torch or something with the Smartlight system and you have it underneath the Smartlights folder, just word of caution, make sure you move that out of this folder first before proceeding, because we're going to delete this folder outside of Unreal Engine here. So for the next step, what you're going to do after you've moved your blueprints that you want to keep out of the Smartlights folder, then what you're going to do is you're going to come to this screen here to where it says My Projects, and you're going to right click on the project that you're going to want to update this for and click Show in Folder. Then we can go to the Content folder, and then we can click on Smartlights, and we can literally delete that because we've already previously moved the blueprints and the stuff that we want to keep outside of this folder. Now your project is looking for Smartlights being in that folder, but that's okay though, because we're just going to quickly replace that, and now you can go and re-download the project, or re-download Smartlights directly to this project again, and it should be working just fine. So this would be the easiest way to replace it from version 2.0 to 3 if you have moved the Smartlights folder. So let's say it's not in the default location. So if you look over here on the right hand side, the Smartlights folder has been moved under the extra folder here. So it's not in the same hierarchy as it would be if you just downloaded it and left it in its default location, which would just be right under content, like this one over here on our left. If you download it just normally, it'll just be right under the content folder. So if it's under a different folder, this is how you would address it in this way. You'll do it just the same as we did in the other way, as if it was in the default location. We're going to move our stuff out of there and what we want to keep and everything first. The only difference is here now is we're going to open up a blank project, and you're going to download the Smartlight system to that, which is here on our left. Now we're going to look over to our right here. It's under, we got to match the same hierarchy, so this is under the extra folder. So if you see here, all content extra. In our other folder, we need to create another folder, and we'll just label it the same identical way, extra. And now we can grab our Smartlights and drag it to this folder. So that way when we go to delete the folder from this one, we can just migrate from this folder. You would just go to migrate, and we can migrate it over to the other project when it's not opened after we delete this folder. So where would that be? That would still be under your project, and it'd be under content. In this case, it's under the extra. It's right here. Then we would delete that folder and then migrate over from that blank project that we've created. Hopefully that makes sense. So after you either re-download those files and overwrite the existing ones in the default location, or migrate it over from a blank project and overwrite the files that way, if you have a different file layout, a different hierarchy of your folder structure. So either way you get that over to the project or replace those files, you want to make sure that you only have one SmartLight system in your project. What do I mean by that? Let's say that we had moved our smart lights into this level prototyping, and let's say our smart lights was under here, and then we re-downloaded the smart lights and we have one under our content and one under our level prototyping. You cannot have both of them exist. They can only be one, and one of the versions. It has to be you either stick with 2.0 or you have to fully use 3.0, which 3.0 has a lot better features and it runs a lot better than the previous versions anyhow. Last but not least, I just want to cover here really quick from the migrating over. If you open up your existing levels that you have, you're going to notice this error here. And it's going to be for each one of the smart lights. You may have quite a few of them that are in here, but don't panic. All this is basically saying is that your SmartEcho doesn't know the boundaries anymore, so you'll just have to set your zones again, which is really, really easy to set up with SmartEcho or the SmartZone helper tool. So no need to worry about that. In this case, boom, you turn it on, boom, boom, zones are reset up. So it's about that quick, which we'll cover how to use this a little bit later in the video, but let's continue getting this set up. So the next step would be, is we're going to need to add some trace channels. So if you go up to Edit Project Settings, and under Collision, you notice that I already have two trace channels that are already here, but what you're going to do is you're going to click New Trace Channel, and we're going to add a first one, and we're going to call it Smart Wall. Just like that, and you're going to set it to ignore, and then you're going to accept that, so it'll add it down here, and then you're going to add another one that's just going to be called Shadow Objects, and set the default response there as well to ignore. Once you have both of these trace channels, then what we're going to do is we're going to go under our Smart Lights folder, we're going to go under our blueprints, and the Smart Lights itself. We're going to open up that blueprint. You notice up here it says Megalights for 5.5. We'll get to that in a second. And to answer everybody's question, yes, it does work with Megalights. We'll cover that in a little bit. But for now, you're going to scroll up here, and you're going to look down here, and you're going to see two trace channels. You're going to see a trace smart wall and a trace shadow objects. You just want to set those to the collision the trace channels that you just previously created here. So the trace smart wall, set that to your smart wall, and trace shadow object, set that to shadow objects. Then you can compile and save that. Then the other one we need to change is if we back out and go into data, we can see there's a SmartEcho. If we look over here on the right panel, you can see a trace channel. We need to set that to Smart Wall. Once that's set, you can compile and save. Then what we need to do is you need to find your character. Don't worry, this is the last thing that we need to do here. You need to find your character that you're going to be your third-person character, or whatever character you'll be using this on. Open that up, and we're going to go up to the top and click on Class Settings, and we're going to add an interface. To add an interface, it's very, very easy. Just click over here and click Add, and you can search for the Smart Player interface, and you'll see it that'll come up, and you can add it. I've already added it here. And then after that is added, your interface, your Smart Player interface, you should see over here on the left-hand side or wherever you have this panel, under Interfaces, there's a player setup. If you just double-click on that, it'll bring you here, but your screen will look more like this. This is how it will start. So let's compile and save that, and this is really easy to do. We just need a world location to tell the system on how it's supposed to be optimizing things. So we'll just grab our mesh, and we'll just literally type, whoop, if I can spell here, world location, get world location, and plug that in, and compile and save. Boom! You are good to go. The system should be now fully functional. Let's cover and let's address a few extra things if you were in farther versions. Every one of the different versions, say you open up your demo map and you're looking at this and the lighting doesn't look the same. It looks a little odd, or things don't blend nicely. Well, every version I've noticed the settings are slightly different. And so in one version where it might look good, in the other version it might take a little bit different tweaking to make it look the same. One thing that I did notice that is different in different versions is your source radius. So source radius, a lot of different versions, it blurs it a lot differently. So that can have a big impact on how things may look. So if you open this up and say, oh man, this looks terrible. Well, I just have the one version for 5.1 and this should work in everything, including 5.5. So now let's flip over to 5.5 and let me show you what the last step that you need to do to get it all fully set up to work with Megalights. I'll see you over there. Okay, so we're in Unreal Engine 5.5 now, and if you notice, even after you have everything else set up that we had just in the previous little tutorial here, and you still see these little weird blotches in the shadows seem to be all messed up, don't worry, there's an easy fix for that. You can go to your project settings, and we're just going to search for Atlas. And you can see down here, deferred lighting uses light function Atlas. You can go ahead and take the check out of that. And as soon as you do, you notice all of your lights are fixed in the level now. So, and the other thing that you're going to want to change if you are using Megalights. So we'll just cover that real quick. The first thing that I want to do is let's go down to rendering. And we're going to scroll up here until we get down to our Megalight section. In order to enable that, we need to turn on support hardware ray tracing. Now you can see that we can put a check in there. So let's go ahead and restart. Okay, after we have restarted here, you notice that our lighting seems to look like it's messed up again. So if we're going to use Megalights here, we need to add a little bit of extra code that's in here. What we're going to want to do here is you're going to want to drag in each one of your lights. And then we are going to drag off the light here and set Megalight, set allow Megalights. And we're going to do this for all three of these. Control C to copy, Control V to paste, so we can paste two more of these in here. And let's just get these all set up here. After these are all set up, we want to drag out of this boolean here, the on, and let's connect all of these. And compile and save. If you go back to the level now, you'll see that it has fixed those shadow issues. So essentially what it's doing is when it is in a save state like this, Megalights is disabled, and when it fully blends back, it'll flip the Megalights back on and it'll refresh the light so it works properly. Okay, so let's go ahead and hit play here and let's take a look at the results in 5.5. With Megalights, you can get a lot better performance in using it. However, there are some downfalls with Megalights. So let me go ahead and show. For one, a lot of people that complain about the fuzzy shadows. You can see the artifacts that it kind of gives in the shadowing there. And if you notice also with the lighting effects here as well, you'll kind of see a little bit of fuzziness to it while the lighting is being moved. That is just how Megalights is rendering the light. But you notice that everything works just the same. You'll notice over here, you'll notice these artifacts probably a lot more. Especially, look at that. That's the downfall with Megalights. You'll notice also here that the shadowing doesn't look the same in 5.5 after the snapshot is disabled. So if we go ahead and click on this and disable snapshot, you'll notice it seems like the shadow disappears. And that's because, like I was mentioning earlier, is the source radius. Let's go and turn that back down to 0. It's a little more sensitive in 5.5, so that would fix a lot of those shadow issues too that you may have. Okay, and last but not least, show you one more little tiny kind of a weird glitch here. If the light source is too close to something and I'm using Megalights, you can see the, look at that shadow glitchiness when this snapshot is not on. This is just the way that it's naturally rendering this. I found the solution that was to this is you would go to whatever light you're using. In this case, we can just select all 3 of them, and then we can go and find our Megalights shadow method and change that to virtual shadow maps. That'll fix that issue as well. So if you see glitchiness like that, that's how you go ahead and fix that as well. Okay, so this section is on basic light setup and setting up zones with SmartEcho here. So let's cover the basics on how these lights work to begin with here. The first thing you need to do in any one of your scenes that you want to use the smart lights in, you need to go to your smart lights, blueprints, and then there's a smart light manager. You want to make sure you grab this and you drag this into the scene anywhere. This is essentially how it optimizes all the other lights in the scene, is based on your settings under your smart light manager. So if we go ahead and look over here to our right in our panel here, we have these features here, or these settings that we can change. So by default, dragging this into the level, it'll be measuring off of your FPS. So if your FPS drops beneath this minimum here, it starts optimizing the lights, and when it reaches this goal, it starts undoing those changes. So that way it's back to normal and running at full performance again. When you go ahead and set these, just do note that they need at least 5 frames in the middle. You can't go any higher, for an example here, because unless we move, because this lower one here is at 55. If your game is capped at 60, don't set it right at 60, because if it never goes above the 60 frames a second, it'll never start adding dynamic lighting back in. So ideally you want to make sure that this is at least a minimum of like 2 frames underneath your target goal. So ideally this is where it'd normally be set up. These other little options that we have here is we have debug zones, which we'll get to in a second. That basically just shows you it when you hit play on what's taking place, so that way you can see the optimization. And disable system, just like it says there. When you put a check in there, it just shuts the system off completely. A new method that we have added here is distance-based. So if you turn this on and you put a check in there, it no longer goes by your FPS. Instead, it goes by your distance. In this case, we have it set to 1,000. This seems to be a good starting point. Now, these methods can be changed very, very easily on the fly runtime in different zones, which we'll cover later on. So you're not stuck with one of these options. That's the great thing about this, is you can change them for different rooms. Let's say you want one room to go by the FPS method, and then the next room will go completely by distance based. It'll ignore the FPS then. So that way you can optimize your rooms essentially however you want. But in this case, we're just going to leave it on distance based, so that way we can see what's taking place when I hit play here. The first thing you're going to want to do is you drag in a smart light in your scene, and this will act like just normal lights, your normal Unreal Engine lights. Wherever you put these lights, instead of changing your settings under the light itself under here, don't change any settings here. Make sure it's just under Smart Lights and scroll down and you're going to see Smart Light Setup. This is where you make the changes. So if you want to change your intensity, that's in here, or we want to change the color, all that kind of stuff, change the attenuation radius, all of that gets changed here. Now remember, each one of these are separated. So to change your light, we'll go back up here, it says light type. You notice that you can change it here. You can change it to a rectangle light here. We can go to our spotlight, point light, all the basics that would be covered. So essentially all of these are the same. I'm not going to go into complete depth on all of these because this is basic lighting stuff here. The only thing that you should note that there is an option that has been added under the rectangle light and the spotlight for a rotation. So why is this rotation in here? Well, because when we go to set up our zones, if we want to rotate our light, so let's go and change this here real quick so we can explain this here. Rectangle light, we'll go and use that. So once we set up our zones, which the area in which your player is going to go in, if you just grab the light itself and rotate it, it's going to rotate the zone with it. Instead, I've added a rotation that's under here, so you should be able to rotate this light without actually moving the zone if you've already placed it and you don't want to reset up your zones. So same thing with spotlight, you can spin it all down here. So that's why these rotations have been set up in there. So let me go ahead and show you how SmartEcho works, and then we'll get back to that rotation here in a second. Okay, so this is how to use the SmartEcho feature here. The SmartEcho feature is a great feature. It helps you set up your zones for your player. What are these zones? Well, let's talk about those first. So if we scroll down and we see a draw zone, let's go ahead and turn that on. Usually this will be a little bit smaller than this, but I've already previously just set up a zone a little bit here. So anyhow, this green debug box here, when your player walks into that, it would turn this light on, and then it tells the system that this is a light that can be managed, it can be optimized, things can be changed by the smart light system. And when your player leaves this zone, it completely disables the light and it shuts it off, so that way it doesn't pull any resources whatsoever. But in this case, if we left this zone how it was, that light for that room would not turn on until I just entered this front room, or this front door here. So in that case, we're going to want to change the zone because you can see it from way back here in this corner. So the first thing we need to do to get this system to actually work here is it needs to know what are the walls that it can work with here. So remember those trace channels that we set up earlier? Basically what we can do is we can select all of our walls. In this case, I just know it's these cubes. I would select these, and you can go down to your collision settings. Now this can be done in a blueprint as well, so if you save it under a blueprint, you don't need to do it again when you start dragging in walls and everything. But essentially for this case right here, this was on default. I came down to my collision presets. We're going to click on custom, and you're going to scroll down, and you're going to see those two trace channels that we added that were there. You got your smart wall and smart objects. Smart walls, anything that you click to block on a smart wall will work with SmartEcho, so then it knows those are the walls that it will consider to when it's sizing the room. The reason why this is here is because let's say you have a bunch of objects that are in the way, but you can still kind of see through it. You don't want that being affected by the calculations on how it should actually size the room. So you'd only select on what are the walls for smart wall. So basically after we set our collision there for smart wall, then each one of these lights will work with SmartEcho, because now it'll block that. So let's go back up and let's enable our SmartEcho. And the first time you push Echo Gather Data. So this is going to show our line traces here, and you're going to see we've got some red that was over in the corner. So right away it's going to size the box to the room, but we can see the light that's over there. So after you hit Echo Gather Data, you can click Echo Set Zone. After you see the zone has been set, we have this debug. So you can see these yellow lines, or these yellow boxes essentially over here. This is where this light can still be seen. So we're just going to hit Echo Update Zone to make sure that's in there, and then Echo Set Zone again. There we go. It's literally that quick. So now we know that this zone, when you're still inside the box, when we can see that light that's over there. But when we pass over this side, that light would be technically off on the other side of this wall here. If you want to do final adjustments after the SmartEcho has set up a zone for you, I'll cover this again here real quick. Echo Gather Data. You can just hit Echo Update Zone right away, but you need to hit Echo Set Zone at the end, and that'll set these two parameters for you. Okay. So let's scroll down and just click on Draw Zone. So this is when we do our movement and stuff. You can click Draw Zone, and you see you got this yellow arrow that's here. This yellow arrow is always going to be pointing towards the closest wall that this light is on. For an example, it's closer to this wall right here, so it's pointing in that direction. Why is this arrow here? Well, because this makes it really easy now to go ahead and move our zones and really fine-tune it. Because if you come down here, we have the activation zone size, front offset, and side offset. The zone offset world, you most likely won't be using this very much, because when you go ahead and drag this, this will always move in by your world settings instead of relative space, should I say. So if we come down here, this front offset, remember this is always front to back. If we're aligned with that arrow, this will be front to back. So you can slide that back, forward or back, and then this will always be left to right. So we can move those zones really easy by using the front offset and side offset, so that it sets this relative to the light. Your activation zone size, should I say, that's right here. Remember, the first one's always front to back, second one's always side to side, and then the third one's up and down. Same thing with this, front to back, side to side. This is front to back, side to side. So if we really wanted to pull this in front to back, let's undo that, and this would be side to side. So after we have this zone set up, I like where this is at, but it's probably too high. So let's go to our activation zone size, and let's just bring that down. And we could probably actually just take that, and we can move that down to, we'll use the world offset and just kind of tuck that into the floor a little bit in case we have a multi-story building. We don't want that shining through onto the next floor. Okay, so now the next thing that I want to cover is, remember how we briefly covered here for the rotation settings. In this case, we're using the rectangle light. Remember, this is a prime example here. If I go ahead and rotate the light itself, it rotates the zone with it. We don't want that. So in that case, we can come down here for rectangle light or a spotlight, and you can still rotate the light separately without having to, instead of having to move the zone itself. So that's why those rotation settings are actually under there for rectangle and spotlight. So after you get your zone setups, those don't move. So after you're done with this, essentially you can just come up here, you can either click refresh and it'll turn off draw zone, get it all ready, or you can just shut off your draw zone. That is ready to go. So that zone is set up, and you notice that if we go ahead and hit play right now, if I jump out of my body here and go and look, this light is actually off because we're not in there. But you notice by the time that we actually get around to see it, that light is actually on. So those zones alone, without any other optimization, is literally going to get you a bunch of performance there. But we're not done though. There's a lot of other things to optimize this even farther. You don't have to do this with just one light at a time. If you have a group of lights that you want to do with this method as well, you completely can. So if we go ahead and select all of our smart lights that are in the scene here, we can go and enable SmartEcho. And let's hit Echo Gather Data, Update Zones, Echo Set Zones. Something else that I want to add to this section here really quick is if you're going to move your zone and let's say that arrow disappears after you have your draw zone on, it's very easy. You can just come up here and the enable SmartEcho. You just go ahead and just click that again. You'll get that arrow back so you can always see on which direction it is, so you can orientate yourself before moving the zones itself. There is another option here with SmartEcho. Let's say, for an example, that this light was a little bit closer to the door. Let's go ahead and switch this to a point light here. Let's go and change this color back to something that's white. And let's position this over by the door here. So in this case, the light is behind this wall. So if we go up here and echo for the zone and echo update zone, you'll notice that it still sets the zone to this area because this light is behind the wall. However, I can see the light reflecting off of this other wall that's over here from this angle. So if I'm standing here, even though this is behind the wall, it set the zone correct, but I can still see it reflecting. So in that case, we're going to use the other feature here that is Echo Reflection. What this is going to do is it'll give it one bounce on the line trace before setting those zones. So I'll show you what I mean. Echo Gather Data, and you can see it's actually bounced off the wall and came down here. Now we update zone and set zone. So now you notice it pulled the zone way out here because we can still see it bouncing off of this wall. So reflections can sometimes help in scenarios like that. Last thing that I want to touch on here is that SmartEcho, in this case, if you have a light that's out in the middle of nowhere or it doesn't have any walls that are on the other side, and you try to use SmartEcho, so we'll gather the data, update zone, and click Echo Set Zone. You notice that it kind of goes along the wall a little bit, and it kind of fills it in on the other side too. There's no other wall for it to figure out its calculations. So if it's in the open like that, you're going to get weird results. So that's why the next tool that we're going to cover here is the SmartZone Helper tool. And that will be an easy way to set all of your lights without using the SmartEcho method, just in case that doesn't work in certain scenarios. So let's cover that now. This is the easily set up zones here. Let's go and cover what this does. So under SmartLights Blueprints, you're going to see this SmartZone Helper tool. Let's go ahead and drag that into the scene. And just as before, on the lights themselves, you can click this draw zone, and we can set the zone however big that we want. Let's go ahead and just make it the size of that. That doesn't really matter for now. This is just for demonstration purposes. But any lights that are inside of this zone, when I go ahead and hit Setup Zones, it looks like nothing happened. But if I go and shut the draw zone off for the SmartZone Helper tool, let's go check one of these lights. This light in here. Let's go and click Draw Zone. You notice it's set the zone identically to the SmartZone Helper tool. So if you want to just set a room and you want to set all of those lights to the same zone size, you can use the SmartZone Helper tool. The SmartZone Helper tool can do other things too besides just set the zones for the lights. The first thing that we're going to cover that's on here is you can have this override your settings for when your player goes into that area. This is what I previously touched on a little bit earlier, but if we put a check in override settings and say our normal method that we have set down here for our Smartlight Manager is distance based, you noticed I set this zone over here. I clicked override settings and it's on FPS. So when your player enters the zone, it'll no longer be the default distance based, then it'll start going by your FPS and measure it that way. The minimum and maximum FPS are still set under your SmartZone light manager, or your smart light manager over here. So it'll still follow these minimum and maximum FPS goal. But that's essentially how you change the methods on the fly. It's just with your player entering that zone. So say we had it measuring on FPS, and we can do the opposite on this. So when they enter this zone, you can change the mode down here, and we'll go distance based. And now you can also change the distance in which you want it to be to each one of those lights as well. So you can really optimize each room however you want. So that way you're not just stuck with one method for throughout the, let's say, the whole entire map. Okay, so the last thing that I want to cover here with the SmartZone helper tool, setting up the zones anyhow, is first things first, I went back and I reset each one of these lights, so you can see that they're just little tiny boxes. Each one of them have their zones that have not been set yet. You can see this one's just a little tiny box too. Let's say we drag our SmartZone helper tool into the scene and we get our zone set up. We want all these lights over here to follow the perimeter or the diameter of that SmartZone helper tool, except these two lights. We don't want this one, and we don't want this one over here to be part of the SmartZone helper tool. But we want all these to follow that zone. So that's why there's been added in here the use ignore zones. So let's go ahead and draw zone and click on the use ignore zone. You're going to see a little box that's going to appear around the middle there. If we go over here to our right and we scroll down, you're going to see this ignore zone. Just click on that, and you can drag this wherever you want, and you can resize this as well. So we'll say the box radius, we'll just make sure that this is large enough to get those lights that's in there. Well, that's way too big, but you'll see here. So now these two lights will not be set by the SmartZone helper tool, but every other light that's not in that ignore zone will be set. So if you notice that we scroll back up, go to our SmartZone helper tool, and let's click setup zones. Let's go ahead and turn that debug off there. Now you notice if we go and check this light for an example, draw zone, that took on the exact same shape and size as the SmartZone helper tool. However, the ones that were in our ignore zone, draw zone, you notice that did not affect those lights. So that's a way that you can get certain lights to be ignored by the SmartZone helper tool, just in case you have lights that are still inside of that, but you don't want them being set by the SmartZone helper tool. So that's how you can use the ignore zone feature. The other thing that you can use the SmartZone helper tool for is replacing non-smart lights with smart lights in your scene very, very quickly and easily. So let's say you have a scene that's already set up like this, but none of these are smart lights. These are just normal lights that have been dragged into the scene, and this was just quickly set up here. Let's say we don't want to go through all the trouble on setting all these up again and swapping them out with smart lights. Well, there's a really, really easy way you can do this. So if we go under our smart lights itself, we're going to go under blueprints. Let's get our SmartZone helper tool, just like we did before. Draw zone. This time, let's just make sure that it covers everything here. And then you can easily click replace non-smart lights. Before we click that though, the only thing you want to make sure is that each one of these lights is set to candelas, because the intensity unit is measured by that method, and that's how it does the conversions to make sure the brightness and everything is set identical. So as long as all your lights are set to candelas, this should work great. So we'll go back here and we click replace non-smart lights. That is it. It looks identical, but every one of these lights now are a smart light. It's that easy. So if you've got a level and you want to replace your lighting that's in there with smart lights, but you don't want to go through the the hassle of replacing all of those lights by hand, that's an easy method to just use that very, very quickly to get you up and going really fast. The only time that this does not work is if you have a light inside of a blueprint. Then it's not going to replace the light. However, if they're just lights by themselves and they're not inside of a blueprint, it'll easily replace them. And then you're ready to go. It's that easy. Okay, so now that we understand on how to use the SmartEcho and the SmartZone helper tool to set up your zones, the next thing that we want to cover in this section here is just these three. Only use zones, only disable shadows, or never disable shadows. You can only have a check in one of these at a time, but whatever one you set these in, it'll change on how these lights are actually optimizing themselves, or if you want to use them for creative effects, that this is something that you'd be changing down there as well. By changing the modes, you notice that the light color, the symbol that's above it, will actually change. So if it's in only disable shadows, it's blue. If we take the check out of it and we just leave them all off like that, this is fully automatic mode. It's a white. And then if we go never disable shadows, it turns red, which we'll describe what they all do here in a second. So let's leave it on only disable shadows. So this is by default when you drag it into a level. And right now I have this set up by distance based, so that way we can determine what's going on. Oh, by the way, before we go into that, it's on our Smartlight Manager, so you can see the debug. I turned that on down here, debug zones, so that way we can see what's going on. Alright, let's hit play. So in this case, the debug is showing that the red means that the shadows are completely off. Dynamic shadows, it turns it off. But when it turns green, the dynamic shadowing is turned back on. In this case, we don't notice any difference because when it shuts that off, there isn't really any objects or anything around it to cast any shadows. So in this case, it's perfect because we wouldn't need to do anything else because we don't notice any drastic changes. However, in this scenario that's over here with this method, you'll notice that the 4 poles that are out of the ground, when those shadows turn on and off, that is you notice that big time. So there would be a different method that we would use in this case. But in this case, this would be just fine. So by default, that's what only disabling shadows does when you first drag it into the scene. It's completely by default. So now let's take that check out of there. They're going to turn white, and that means that these are in fully automatic mode now. What does this mean? If you want to think of them as LODs, so to speak, you have stages here, which I'll describe when I hit play here. You'll see in the debug. The blue is the first stage that reduces the size first by about 25%. The second stage is it reduces it about 50% of its actual attenuation radius. And then the last stage is red, which it'll disable the shadows. So you got 3 stages here. So turn the shadows on, now it'll enlarge it once, and you got 1 more that'll enlarge. Now obviously in this case we don't want to use this like this if we were doing it for a creative effect. This is just something that if you have lights that are on buildings and stuff, that it can kind of pull that in then if it's not really necessary. If you're going by FPS, then that's another method. But like before, you still notice it turn on and off, and you can see the different stages as they go back up. So now it goes from green to blue, blue to yellow, and then yellow to red, when red means the shadows are off. So now if we wanted to make this quicker here, let's say, we can skip one of those LODs, I guess, if you wanted to call it an LOD. And how we do that is we can scroll down and you can see a skip auto LODs. Essentially this works the same identical way, except we're skipping the blue. Why is that different? So that way you're not waiting for that to go up again. You'll see it goes right when we get on top of it, it goes right to full attenuation radius, whatever you had it set at, and it automatically turns the lighting on and everything. It's basically only 2 steps then. So that way you can see over here, when I get close to it, it's already gotten to its full size there. So the next one that we'll be using is the never disable shadows. If we put one in the never disable shadows, you notice that they turn red. And basically, here we'll get the skip auto LED out of there again. So it works just like the auto mode, except it'll get to its smallest size, which is 50%. So that way you can kind of get a little extra resources that way, but it'll never shut the shadows off. So essentially you'll always have dynamic shadowing, but it'll kind of decrease the attenuation radius just to get a little extra performance out of it. Because it does add up over time if you got a bunch of these lights in the scene. However, again, this may not be great to use in certain scenarios to where you always want it to be nicely lit in there and you never want it to look dark in one of the corners. This is just another method that's there. You got to kind of use these as tools. You get used to the tools and you use them in different case scenarios. So those are the different methods that are right there. That is not covering Snapshot, which would be the other method to where we can bake the shadows essentially into a light function, and it'll reproject the shadows in place when the dynamic shadows are turned off. But otherwise, understanding that these three, if you have it in use only zones, this is basically exactly what it sounds like. It'll literally just use the zones and there'll be no optimization applied to those except for however you have your zones set up. So if there is an area to where you don't want the light changed at all, you don't want to do anything with it, you just want to use the zones, well then you can just select that. But like I said, just keep in mind you only want to check in one of these at a time, or none at all for the fully automatic mode. Okay, so let's learn how to use Snapshot here. So just like we had set up to use the SmartEcho on how we changed the collision on some of your meshes that are in your scene, there's another purpose for this though, for setting the smart wall. Basically what this is going to do is it gives us a white surface so it knows what surfaces a shadow is being casted onto. Not the item that's casting the shadow, but the item that the shadow is on. So if you can kind of wrap your head around that, you want to separate these here. What do I mean by this? So make sure all your walls or whatever you have near your light to have this smart wall collision being blocked, but not the shadow objects. Make sure that that is still set to ignore. If you have these both set like this, it just won't work. It won't give you a good result. So you can only have one or the other. So this is what the light is being casted on, and this is what is casting the shadow itself. So in this case, even the floor that we have, we want to go and change the collision on this floor too, because the light, you notice over here in the scene, is casting on the floor. So we'll just go and change that as well. It's not a big deal. Just go and change that, and shadow wall, we'll set that as a wall too, even though it's a ceiling or a floor or whatever, however you want to look at it. But anyhow, in this blueprint, I just have these four shapes here, and if I open that blueprint, all I basically did is it's just these 4 static meshes here, and for each of them I just went under the collision and I made them a smart object. Block smart object, not smart wall, because these are the things that will be casting the shadows, essentially. So if you set it in a blueprint, or you can do it in your level, that's how you'd want to have this set up. So we're already set up here. So let's use Snapshot. Once that's all set up like that, this is really, really easy to use, and it's pretty cool here. So we're going to go down, and the first thing we're going to do is we're going to click on Show Snapshot Zone. As soon as you click that, anything that you're going to see this white shimmer on are surfaces in which the shadow is casted upon, meaning that it's the item that has the shadows on it, not the thing that's casting the shadows. So you notice the floor here and the walls, they turn white because they're within this, anything that's in the attenuation radius, it's going to have that shimmer. So once we got that set up, we're going to want to move this zone. What this zone is we just want to put it around the items that are casting the shadows that we want to take a picture of, essentially. So in this case, this is really easy to do. The offsets are always front to back, remember, and left to right. So if we just get this set up here, you can actually pull this down a little bit, and that looks pretty good. And when you go to check it, you can open the snapshot panel here, and you'll see enable snapshot, enable it. If you have successfully done this, you'll see the items themselves. You'll see which items are going to be casting the shadow. I know this seems really, really complex, but you'll get used to it, and you'll be able to do this pretty quick over time. So the only one thing that I do want to tell you, and there is a reason why it was created this way, is if you have the enable snapshot on, when you go to drag, let's say these zones, these offset zones, now you'll notice that if I disable snapshot, those are still glowing. And the reason why is because it was never told to remove these materials, because it's no longer inside that zone. Now, I could have encoded it to do that, but there's a reason why I didn't, because as you're sliding that cube, you might bump into other objects that you don't want this light to cast shadows. So in that case, just keep in mind when you turn that on, if it's not in the right place and these are not glowing, go and turn snapshot off, and then you can collapse this, move your zone, and then recheck it. So in this case, we're all set up. So the only thing that there is to do is we're literally going to shut off our show snapshot zone so that we can get rid of those materials. And we're going to scroll all the way up, and we're just going to click shadow snapshot. So basically what this has done now is this, under our content, right under our content folder here, it's created a textures folder. What this has done is it's created basically a positive and a negative that we can get shadows out of. You notice everything's nice and white. Regardless of the materials, it'll always get a nice white picture like that. So that's why you got to make sure you set your collision channels, because if you have like a dark wall, this may not work properly. So that's why these materials need to be replaced before I take the picture. So after that, it puts those together in a light function and casts it onto the wall. But now you're thinking, what's wrong with the poles themselves? Well, after every time we do a snapshot, I always click refresh anyways, because that camera disappears. You'll see this button now appear. That means that it's locked in. This is snapshot. You see that these shadows are actually in a light function now. And because the shadow is behind these objects, how do you get light back on the surface? See what I mean? So, to solve that, There's a lot of calculations that are being taken place as well to light it on the other end. We're going to go in mesh makeup intensity, and we're going to start turning that up. So we're going to get some of the white back that we lost that's in there. And the idea is you want to match this as close as possible, because when you get close to this, this is going to change over. So that's a little too bright. Let's pull that down. We want to get this as close as possible. There's the bottom. It's kind of got a bit of a shimmer there that's at the bottom, or more of a black area. So in this condition right now, which will smooth this out even better, but when I'm far away from this, that's completely off. There's no dynamic shadows. It's using the snapshot, and when I get close to it, it's going to blend the materials back and then switch the dynamic shadows back over. But it does it so quick that by the time you get there, yeah, we saw that little flicker right there. So we're going to solve that flicker. And how to do that is under Feather. It's under Snapshot Feather. So what feathering is here is essentially, don't think of it as in feathering the edges so much, but it feathers on how it transitions, basically. So if we set this to 20, let's say for an example, you'll notice now, wait till it to do its thing, it's a little bit of a smoother transition. You'll notice when we get closer to it, I saw the top just shimmer a little bit, but unless I'm staring right at that and looking for it, you notice it's blending back, and it's fully blended. So without the debug that's there, let's see how this looks, and we'll see if we actually notice this here. So we come running into the room. Right now that it's no dynamic shadows, I go ahead and run close to this, and yeah, it's already, it was blended a while back. So yeah, it looks good. So that's how we fake the shadows on the wall. Now you can use, I saw it get a little dark there. There's some adjustments we can do here. So the other settings that are in here too under Snapshot. The first one is your opacity. Your opacity, just in case you had an object, or let's say a glass window or something that kind of lets light through but not fully, you can kind of turn this down, but this needs to have your feathering at 0. So then you can kind of you can have some light pass through it if you wanted to, and you wanted to do other types of effects. The second one, your shadow threshold, is this one is essentially on the edges of your shadows. So what you want to do is you want to back this off, and you want to bring it up just until it completes your shadows enough that they look the same. I'm not looking at these objects, I'm looking at the shadows in the back. So you notice this, you can kind of see through a little bit, but when I turn it off, it's darker. So that means that the shadow threshold needs to come up a little bit. So we'll turn that off, turn it on. Down here it's a little dark, but at the sacrifices, the more that you turn this threshold up, the more it's going to kind of darken around these edges of the item actually casting shadows. So right there it's perfect. So we'll turn that on. And the only thing that looks different is these front items, so we can kind of give that a little bit more makeup gain, and this will kind of transition out. We'll feather that for 20, and let's try that. Some of this is going to be a little bit of a trial and error. Looks pretty good. Then you get close to it. It's already transitioned. Okay, I'll pop out of my body here, and you can actually see that these, I'll offset them so we can see what's going on. See the other ones pop in, and then those fade out. But when they're over top of each other, you don't notice it. So this time, by moving the light, you notice that the shadow that's out here is a little too light. Oh, we didn't click refresh. Refresh, so it locks that down. So that would be our shadow threshold. So our shadow threshold, the more we increase that, you can see that it starts to go out a little bit farther. But the more you crank this up, in this case, underneath here is where you're going to start seeing this really bad. Yeah, that's cranked because there's a little bit of shading that's down there too. So we don't want that. So let's reduce that. But we want to go just far enough till we can still see this. Let's try turning that light off. That looks good. There's literally no difference except for down here and the objects, but the shadows themselves is what I'm looking at. So the shadows look good. So that would be great there, and then we can start setting the surface and we can adjust some things that way to get it to look good. But that's essentially if you want to retake a picture. Now, every time that you go to take a picture, if your feather is up and it's not set at 0, it'll most likely give you a blurry picture. But by taking a picture, I have it set up to where it'll take the feathering down to 0. If you get a picture that looks blurry, just reset, not a big deal, and you just take another picture. And then you can refresh that again. It's literally that simple. And it's taken another picture here. But you will have to come back down and re-put your feathering back in if you did have feathering on your light here. But that's essentially how you do that. The other thing that I want to touch base on here as well is that I noticed every engine version is a little bit different. So this is part of the plugin here. We wanted to be able to clean up those textures that aren't being used. Now, depending on your version that you're going to be using this in, they're all a little bit different. But if you have Enable Snapshot checked while you click Reset Snapshot, basically what that's going to do is just clear the textures out of there, but it's not going to delete them. So in most cases, if you want to just do that and clear them out, and then you can shut this off, and then you can go down and delete your textures this way. However, if you have this check, if you have the check off when you click delete, so let's take another picture here. Oh, you notice that we got the nothing there, and that's because my feathering was turned up. So let's just go hit reset and take a picture. Boom, good to go there. Let's hit refresh. So if you don't have a check that's in Enable Snapshot, but you still have textures underneath your render targets down here, when you go and click Reset Snapshot, it'll try and delete those textures. So now if we go to save, you're going to see this error in some of them saying, nope, we can't do anything because the garbage collector hasn't taken care of it yet, basically. So if we hit continue, hit OK, and save again, those other textures are gone now. Different versions work differently. So I know some of them take a little bit to delete those textures. Some of them don't delete them at all. So if they don't, and you have to delete them by hand, then just make sure when you're clearing your textures or resetting Snapshot to click Reset Snapshot while your Enable Snapshot is on. And that'll just clear that out of there, but won't delete the textures. You can go to your textures here, then you can right-click on them and go to Asset Actions, and then we go down and go to Bulk Edit via Property Matrix. If you click on that and go to compression, under maximum texture here, if we hit the little pin, you can see these are set at 0. By default, it's 1024 is essentially what they are. But in this case, we can go and we can make them smaller. We can go 512. Let's try that. So that says maximum texture size. So if we save that, and these textures still look good. So we can actually resize them that way, so that way it's not using the full resolution in the game. It'll save on some memory use. If you want to actually resize them, you can do that as well. However, the one thing I would not recommend, under your Smartlights, Data, Textures, Render Targets, These two right here are essentially your cube render targets that create all the other textures. And that's why we needed this plugin a little bit in the system, because you would have to take the picture and then before it would create these textures and then you would manually have to put them in and everything. We just wanted a little more streamlined. So, but these I would not change the sizes of. These, if you open them up, they're 1000 by 24. If you want to, you can resize them after, but don't resize these original render targets. The one thing that I do want to cover here in this section is when it creates these texture files, it's basically just calling these, it's labeling them smart lights and then the number of the light that's in your level. So essentially, if you have a bunch of lights that are in one level, none of them will overlap each other because they all have their individual names. However, if you have multiple maps and you go to take another picture with a light 1 on another map, and two maps have this light 1 have the same naming convention here, it's going to overwrite this file, because the system was designed to, if you hit refresh and retake a picture, to just overwrite those files with the same name. So when you get photos that are in here, or I shouldn't say photos, but textures that are created, you're gonna want to either take these and pull them out of the folder, pull them somewhere else, because when you go to create another texture in another level, it might overwrite that. So make sure you pull those out of there if you're 100% that you want to keep those textures. So in this case, I just pulled them under my content. And then I could label these if I want to, and I can pull them somewhere else. Another thing, a little bit of advice here, is if you go under all and under your content and right click, after you move stuff, you might have some weird references that are in there. So if you just go up to fix up redirects, you notice that there were some redirects there that needed to be taken care of after moving those textures. Word of caution though, if you've never done that before and you got a very, very large project, this could take a while. So, but you should keep up with that anyways, because it's always good to fix up your redirects in your project anyhow. It'll run a lot smoother. So that's essentially how Snapshot works. But let's cover into the next section here that's still under Snapshot. So if we go down here, we have, this is where our render targets are. These are the images that are in here that are put into the system so that way you can determine what are your shadows. Now, if you have multiple objects, let's say such as, and we paired the two of these, copy, paste, boom, we can pull these over, copy, paste, we can put these anywhere in our levels, however we want, and these are all set up because they're using the same texture. So if I go down here and I look under my render targets, it's still using the same, and as long as the light is in the same position, these will all work. So I don't need to worry about any of these. And all of them have blended over by now. And then when you go to get close to any of these, cast shadows, cast shadows, cast shadows. So you can copy and paste them. So if you have a lot of meshes that are in your scene that are pretty much just a copy and paste, you can kind of group them together like that and use the same textures. You don't need to take another snapshot, I guess, unless things have changed, like there's another item that's added to the scene that's behind this or something like that. But the more that you can reuse these textures, it's going to save on a lot of your memory usage as well. So, and these can be resized after it's taken a picture. Okay, so another thing to cover here is the fade distance. What is that here? Well, the fade distance is basically on how far away from the player do you need to actually see these shadows. For an example, you'll see that that fades out a lot sooner until you get closer. So if you want to actually fade the light function itself, That'll kind of fade it on a little bit. So you can do some creative stuff with that too, or you can just pull that down for optimization as well. So if there's areas like way across the room that you don't necessarily need to see those shadows from here, then you can turn your fade distance down. Otherwise, by default, it's just at 5,000, which you can see it way across the room. So the next few things that I want to cover under Snapshot here is if we scroll down, it's underneath the render targets. If you see that there is a keep SS shadows on, use custom delay, and then there's a custom delay here. So we're just going to focus on the three of these for right now. What is keep SS shadows on? Which obviously the SS is Snapshot. So in this case, the best way to see this is if we drag this light over here for an example. So normally when you're using Snapshot, it's designed to where it's going to fade out the shadows and then turn your dynamic lighting back on. So in this case, if we get close to it, now we have dynamic lighting again, but however, our snapshot disappears. So if we want to use this in a case to where we want that to stay on, that's when we'd put a check in this. So now, if I go and hit play, regardless of the distance, that will always stay in place, and it'll still have dynamic shadows. So when I get away from it, it just shut off the dynamic shadows, but the snapshot is still in place. If you want to go one step better and you just wanted to use this as a straight light function, you don't want it doing anything else, you can have this keep the shadows on, then scroll up and click on only use zones. So now it's just going to be the light function. So you notice that character does not cast any shadows. It's literally just that light function. So if you want to optimize in that way too, you can do it that way, create some really creative light functions, and have fun with that as well. So you'll notice down here the use custom delay. This check here, what is this? What does this do? Well, by default, this is not checked, but if you add any feathering whatsoever, let's say in this case we add 20, it automatically it puts a check in the use custom delay. Basically what that's doing is it's giving a little extra time that is needed for the system to blend back and forth and back and forth. So since you have feathering there, it'll take a little bit longer to blend back to the other state, should I say. But by adding feathering, it automatically checks this. And the custom delay is if you want to add time to this. So let's say we put this at 10 seconds. Basically what that's going to do is the second that it's turned on the full dynamic shadows, like no optimization, it's just, and the second that flips into that, it'll take 10 seconds on top of however long it takes to feather it over before it rechecks it, if it should start to optimize it again and turn the shadows off and do whatever it needs to do. So I wouldn't really turn this up. I would mostly use this at 0. Here, the pros and the cons why this is here. The cons, first of all, is if you start putting this, let's say 30 seconds for an example, and you have this in FPS mode to where it's measuring your frames, if it needs to pull those resources really, really quick to get your FPS back up there, it's going to be waiting that 30 seconds for each one of those lights and it's going to say, nope, I'm not ready. I'm not ready to be optimized. I'm not ready. So it's actually going to take a while before the optimization is applied. The only reason why this was put in here to add an extra delay is when you start doing creative effects. When you start doing creative effects, which we'll cover a little bit later, but in times to where you want to go into an area to where, let's say you have a light that blooms up, but your character runs away from that using the distance mode, and you want to have a delay before it starts to disappear. So in that aspect, you can use the system in a more creative way here, and that's why this custom delay is here. Okay, let's cover the Snapshot Basic. So there's a feature in here. By the way, a quick little tip is that if you hold shift while you click this arrow, let go of shift and click it again, it'll close all your tabs, so that way none of these tabs are open under here. Makes it a little easier to look through these menus here. So anyhow, let's go under our snapshot. Let's use the Snapshot Basic. First we need to enable Snapshot. We can scroll down and we're going to see here, use Snapshot Basic. What is this? Well, basically you can put in any texture file you want over here and then it'll automatically put that into a light function for you. So in this case it comes preloaded with the flashlight texture that's down here, but you can put it, like I said, you can put in any texture that you want. Let's enable the Snapshot Basic. When we first enable it, you're not going to be able to see anything right away, because that's because of this shadow threshold up here under Snapshot. This is how we determine on basically what is going to be the threshold here on how we want to set the light. So you can see right there, let me go into game mode so we can see that. So now we got our flashlight effect. And that's just off this basic texture that's been thrown in here. So basically it uses these textures instead of using the two texture files to create the shadows in Snapshot. It's just a basic version of this. So you'll notice here is that if I don't have a check in keep these shadows on and we go ahead and play, you'll notice that it's only when we get at a distance that it actually applies that the snapshot back on it, your basic texture that you'll be using. So in this case, if you're using a flashlight on this and we wanted that to stay on, we would just click under here, keep SS shadows on. So now when we hit play, it's still turning the dynamic shadows on and off, but when you get close to it, we have dynamic shadows. You can have fun putting your own textures in here, and it's really, really easy to use. The benefit for that is, which will be leading into the next section here, is the flickering here. Well, we'll demonstrate on a larger light over here first. So on this light, you notice we have a flicker speed and lowest brightness. Essentially, the lowest brightness, this is basically telling it what is the minimum that this is willing to go. If you leave it at 1, it's always on. But in this case, if I turn this down to, let's say, 0.8, it'll be subtle. It's more of a candle or maybe a TV or something if you were doing some type of an effect. You can imagine like a horror game. If there's a television sitting there or something like that, you can give kind of an effect that way. If we drop this all the way down to 0, you'll notice that obviously it's more drastic. So if you're doing torches and stuff, I would most likely leave it up a little bit higher, maybe even like a 0.82 or something like that. The flicker speed, let me drop this down a little more drastic so we can see it. The flicker speed, by adjusting that, you can get different effects as well. For an example, this is more of a just on and off kind of an electrical light, or you can go really fast with it to where it's more of a static type look. So whatever you set these to, you can get different results. Essentially, this is just an easy way to put this in here to where you can give your torches and everything a more realistic look on the lighting, but you can use this in a lot of other creative ways as well. That's where this comes in. It is called the flicker trigger. So let's just pull this in here. Now I just added this in here to make this pretty simple here. So by default, when you drag that in there, if you look over here to our right, we have our show zones like we do on the SmartZone helper tool. And we'll say when we go into that zone, let's say all 3 of these lights will flicker. So we can add 3 of them down here. We can go over here, click on this light, add this one, and add this one. So now the brightness is going to be based on those flicker settings in your lights. So this will be the minimum that it'll go to, but the delay will be how long what is the duration that it'll run. So in this case, if we want these to be offset so they don't all blink basically at the same time, we can come down to our flicker speed and we can kind of change these a little bit. So we'll say this one will be maybe a 0.3, this one will be a 0.4, that's fine, and then this one over here will be, let's say, a 0.35, and we'll keep it in that range. So the speed can be individually set, but the flicker zone that you go into, they'll all go to this brightness. So let's see this if it runs for about 10 seconds. There will be flashing lights here, so if you're sensitive to that, so before we get back to our flashlight over here, I want to address one other issue that you may see that's in here when using the flickering is, let's drop this down, and we'll go, so this flicker speed is pretty slow here. You notice that you see white edges. White edges look like they're glowing on the wall there. That's because of your feathering. If you get rid of the feathering, you're okay. So if you're doing flickering effects and stuff like that, the feathering can have an effect of the outline of the shadow. So that is just to note there. But now let's go back to our light over here. The benefit of using the Snapshot Basic is after you load your textures in here, we can go up here and then we can do flicker effects that are on the flashlight too. Let's say like this flashlight is lightly going out here. Let's see. There we go. And let's take that flashlight and we'll speed it up a little bit. So say like it's a flashlight that's starting to go out just a little bit. You can give a little realism with different types of effects in here, and all of these can be called through a blueprint, which I will show you as well. So let's say like you're doing a horror game and you have a flashlight that's on your character or a flashlight that you carry. You can easily talk to the Smartlight system and get that light to flicker in different ways. As you've seen before, the zone that was over here, this was just a generic way to throw this together to show on how this can be done. Feel free to edit in this blueprint. It's pretty simple here to understand that if anybody has some basic coding, but essentially all this is doing is talking to the Smartlight and it's calling this function, start, stop, flicker. Basically, do you want to turn it on or do you want to turn it off? And what's the minimum brightness? That's all you need to tell it. So if you want to, in different ways, communicate to this, you completely can. So next, we're going to put together a blueprint on basically what you've learned so far using this system. If you notice over here, we got the torch that's to our right. We'll recreate this, and I'll show you how I created a blueprint with that. We'll also learn how to make a flashlight, and then we'll go through the different particles and everything that come with smart lights. I'm just letting you know right now, though, disclaimer, that this torch that's on the wall does not come with this project. I am not legally able to give this to you in the Smartlights system. This is just for an example. But if you have any mesh that's a torch or anything that you want to use this on, this will work great. I'm just going to show you the workflow on how this works, how we easily set up a blueprint. Okay, so let's go ahead and create a blueprint here. And in the process, we're going to teach you about Smartlink as well. So in this case, let's go ahead and design that torch. Now remember, the mesh doesn't come with it, but the particles do come with the SmartLight system. And there's 3 different ones to get you started. I'll even cover in here too on how to edit these particles to fit more of any fire source that you're using in your game. So, but for now, if you go to your SmartLights folder under Blueprints and under Child Blueprints, you'll notice there is a SmartLight Child Master. There's no difference between this and the actual SmartLight, the normal SmartLight. The only difference is there's been added underneath here a static mesh slot. So you can go ahead and put a static mesh in there. Now, the reason why I went ahead and go ahead and created this instead of telling people to just go ahead and put a static mesh underneath the SmartLights itself is because it's important on where this static mesh is. The static mesh needs to be paired to the point light because the point light is where everything gets tracked, and the point light, the rotations and everything, it'll turn your meshes. They need to be in this exact layout. So if you need to add more static meshes, that's completely okay. You can add them, but make sure that they are connected to the point light, nothing else. But in this case, if you just want to do, let's say, this torch here, we would drag this SmartLight Child Master into the scene. Then we can go and scroll to our static mesh. Let's gonna go torch. And let's go ahead and put that in there. So as long as we're still selected under the static mesh here, we can go ahead and move the mesh around and not worry about where the light is at. But it's hard to see exactly where this light is. So this is where the next step is going to come in here. And this is Smartlink. So I've already created some for you. And if we go under the Smartlink Actor BP, and we just type Smartlink, you'll see in here the ones that come with Smartlinks. So you have a campfire, a candle, and a torch. These are already set up blueprints to where they will communicate with the particles, so that way it'll optimize those as well based on distance or FPS. So these are already set up. I'll show you how to edit these later, but for now these are the 3 basic ones that come out of the box, so to speak. So in this case we're going to use the torch. So if we go and select on torch, Smartlink torch here, we're going to go up and we're just going to click Smartlink. After we hit Smartlink, you want to click refresh, and you notice it spawns in a particle. So now this particle will communicate with the SmartLight system because it's through SmartLink. But the reason why we wanted to show you this first is because now this makes this a lot easier to position your mesh instead of having to guess exactly where that light would be. So now we can go back under our static mesh here, and we can go ahead and change this. We can move this around however we want. Let's go ahead and turn this off a little bit. Let's go ahead and move that in there, and that looks about good. Actually, we can go up just a little bit higher maybe. And that looks good. So now we can go back to our SmartLight Child Master. Now it's going to spawn that particle in the exact spot of where the light is. So when it spawns that there, let's say you wanted the light a little bit above this. So not right in there and right on top of the particles itself. So if that's the case, we would go over here, select our mesh. Let's go ahead and move that down a little bit. And let's say this was offset like this. So now we can go back to our SmartLight Child Master, scroll down, and you notice there's a Smartlink offset. What this does, and now we can hit G for game mode, and we can take a look at this. What this does is now we can use this offset, and we can actually start dragging this particle around where exactly do we want it to load in. So in this case, if we wanted to drop it more down in there a little bit, we can. That looks pretty good. Now the other problem that I have with this is obviously the light isn't correct. So let's scroll up and let's go to our SmartLight setup. Let's go to our point light. Let's use the temperature, and you can turn this down to give it kind of a little bit of a torch feel there. There we go. It's probably too bright, but that's okay. But there we go. We've created a torch. We can now save this, and if we want to, we can come up here and click on this little button up here, Edit Blueprint for this actor. You can click on that, and basically what you can do is you can create child blueprint class. After you click on that, we can label this whatever we want. So we'll just call this Torch 2. We'll save that, and it put this all together. The only thing it doesn't save in here is the particles, which is really easy because we don't even need to worry about that. Let's go ahead and delete this. If you delete that first, it'll leave the particles left over, but if you go and click Smartlink first. So now when we go ahead and we drag our torch into the level, we could position this like we normally do, and all we would have to do is go all the way down, and remember, it saved our Smartlink torch that's in there. So all we'd have to do now is just immediately just go Smartlink, refresh. We got a particle on it. So say you have a bunch of these blueprints that are in your level. You can, at once, you can select them all. You just click Smartlink and hit refresh, and all the particles are on the torches. So they're not in the blueprint itself, but you're technically spawning them when they come in, and they're fully controlled by the SmartLight system. So there we go. We got a torch there. Now the cool thing that we can do with this torch as well is if we turn this, let's go and put this on this wall, let's say. Under our blueprint that we created here, Torch 2, let's go and edit some things. The first thing that we're going to want to edit in here is we can open the full blueprint mode. There we go. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to want to edit that's in here is we're going to go and click on our static mesh, and we're going to change that collision to that. In this case, the collision's already set. But just in case it's not, make sure that your shadow object that is on block, because that's the torch itself. Or else if that doesn't block it, this won't cast any shadows. But right now, if we go and turn on our snapshot, turn that on, and let's take a look, Snapshot Zone. You notice the torch is glowing. And we can see the shimmer as well, that's going to cast shadows on there. So let's go ahead, let's go all the way up, reset this, and you hit shadow snapshot, and then you notice it doesn't do anything. So this is in here for a reason that it doesn't do anything. Because if you have Smartlink in place and the particles that are there when it goes to take a picture, it's going to interfere with the picture itself. So it's purposely put in there that it will not take a picture if you have Smartlink on there. But you don't need to worry about it because it's so easy to add and remove. You just click Smartlink, it's gone, now we can take a picture. And then you can refresh that and then hit Smartlink again and refresh, and we got it back. It's literally that simple. So now that we have that with a picture taken of that, because that's snapshot, let's go and see how drastic the changes are here. Not barely at all. This is going to look great. And let's go ahead and take a look at this. So you notice right now, the dynamic shadows are shut off, and the particles are shut off as well. But once you get close enough, dynamic shadows come on, and so do the particles. Let me back away again. It's going to turn the particles off. When I get close, it automatically lights up the fire, and the dynamic shadows are back on again. So let's go through a different method here with Smartlink while we're covering Smartlink a little bit. So let's go and drag in a smart light that's in the scene here, and let's just say that we want under the smart light, we can go down Smartlink actor. Remember, just search for Smartlink and you'll get your 3 options that come with it. So let's do a campfire for an example. So if we select campfire, come up here, hit Smartlink and refresh, we got like a little campfire type particle that's here. But say we don't want the light, we just want it to control just the particles itself. You can scroll down and there's a thing here that says Smartlink both active. If you take the check that's out of that, it'll only work with the particles itself. So now if we set the zone that's to that, just like you would if it's a light, Echo, set that up, refresh. Now those particles are using the distance space and they're technically optimized. See, it's on, off, on, off. So that's another way that this fully optimizes with particles as well. So coming back over to the light here, let's add the little extra realism here to this. So if we're not done here yet with this, if we go to snapshot that's here, we don't even need to feather this because honestly you can barely see anything. The only thing that I can see is if I'm ultra close to this is actually the light that's casting through this ever so slightly. So in that case, it's so small, and at a distance by the time you get here, you don't even really notice that, so I wouldn't worry about that anyways. And plus, when you add a flicker that's in there, it's easier to cover up these transitions, because that way if they do see something change, well, then they just contribute it to being the flicker of the light itself. So this gives it a little extra realism, and it will actually cover up any other issues as well. Let me go ahead and turn the debug off, and I'll show you this once with the debug off. Let's take a look. Another thing that you can do as well is instead of taking pictures every time that you put one of these in the level and say you're going to repeat and use this over and over and over, what I would basically do then is I would take these, you can scroll down where your render targets, I can just copy these and put them in here. Let's open this up and we'll scroll down to our render targets in here. We'll just right click on that and paste it in. So now if we compile and save, every time you drag a torch into the level, it'll automatically use those shadows. And as long as there are any huge drastic changes, the majority of the time you can get away with it, and they'll still look pretty good. Now some people are probably going to say, well, if you click on that, why don't you just go over here and apply instant changes to blueprint? When you, for some reason, sometimes it does not save the render targets and certain things that are in there. So if it's not saving settings, I found that you just have to open the blueprint and put the render targets in there, and may have to change some things in there. The only thing I forgot to do in the blueprint is to check enable snapshot, but there you go, snapshot is enabled. We are good to go. Hit play. Let's check this out. So you notice the shadows themselves. Shadows still look good. So you can get by using those same textures over and over throughout the level. So, but we do want to select on the 2 of these and hit Smartlink because we want to get the particles that are there. So now those would all have particles as well. Just a quick little thing that I want to cover here about the Smartlink. So if we go ahead and take a look here, if we go under our Smart Lights, Blueprints, Smartlink, you'll see that these blueprints are in here. and we got our particles over here. These are the particles themselves. We got the little campfire that's here. Basically what this is doing is there's a user parameter that was created in each one of these particles. So each one of these particles that come with this, they're all controlled by a blueprint. In this case, this is the campfire, the candle, and the torch, and those particles go inside these, essentially. So let's go take a look at the torch, because that's what we're working with right now. Let's go pop that open. Now, when this pops up here on our event graph, this is very, very easy on what's going on here. Essentially up top here, we're just setting the spawn rate by using these timelines. So basically all we're doing is you can double click on these, and this is how long it's taking for the particles to turn on, and then this is how long it's taking for the particles to turn off. In this case it's 5 seconds. It just kind of dwindles out over that. So if you know anything about timelines, feel free to edit this so you can really dial this in here. You can see here after dragging in one of these candles as well, and using the Smartlink, you can add all the little flames to every one of your candles as well. But in this case though, when you use Snapshot on something this small, I would definitely reduce the texture size after, because there's no reason that for every candle you need a texture size 1024. Okay, so let's go ahead and make a flashlight here. One problem that we're going to have with the flashlight, and why I want to show you how to do this, is because on an object that has physics on it, such as let's say a flashlight in a game, and that you drop the flashlight and it rolls around or can be kicked around, and the character goes and picks it up. Well, normally this isn't going to work in this way if we just use the Smartlight Child Master, because when we drag this into the scene, you notice this static mesh here. We need everything to be, the light itself to be paired to the static mesh, not the other way around, because the problem is when you try to simulate physics on this, the light won't move with it. So if that makes any sense. But here's how we make a flashlight. We're going to do it the other way around here. We're going to create a empty blueprint here first, and we're just going to call this BP flashlight. So let's go ahead and open that up. If you have a flashlight mesh, you can go and add that here, but basically for now I'm just going to put in a static mesh here. Let's go as cylinder. So this will be our flashlight. Let's make this thing a lot smaller, because that is a huge flashlight. So let's go 0.2 by 0.2. That's probably even too big. 0.1 by 0.1. And let's bring that down. We'll go 0.5. Let's say this is our flashlight. So the next thing that we want to do here is I'm going to actually tip this. Now we're going to add a child blueprint, or a child actor here. And under over here for our child actor class, then we're going to add in the smart lights. And we'll pick just the basic smart lights here. So now normally in the old method, this is how we were adding smart lights to it. But now by doing it this way, it doesn't expose all the parameters to change the stuff in the level. You kind of have to do it in the blueprint, but that's okay in this case, because this flashlight, it's not going to change. And we could put other code in here too to kind of talk to the flashlight and make it flicker in certain cases and everything as well. But for now though, we have our child actor that's in here. Let's go ahead and pull this child actor where the tip of our flashlight's going to be. But this is not going to be if you can go under here for your child actor and click on default, we can scroll all the way down, smart lights right here. So this is not going to be a point light, so let's change this to a spotlight. But let's go and pop this in our level so I can see exactly what's going on here. So we'll pull our flashlight into here, and let's go ahead and turn this. So there's essentially our flashlight. So now we can save that for now. Now, under there, we're going to have to go and set up our activation zone. Now essentially this is how big or how far away from the flashlight your character would have to be before it disables the flashlight entirely. So we'll just make this quite a bit of a distance. We'll just go 3,000. 3,000 by 3,000 by 3,000. So now, instead of, we can compile and save that. So now, instead of setting up the zones with the SmartEcho tool or setting it up with the SmartZone helper tool, we would just set the zone right in the blueprint itself. Because that way, if your character is within that range, it'll just turn that flashlight on. You'll have to play with the ranges, but in this case, it's completely okay if it's about 3,000 or so. And that way, if the player picks up the flashlight will travel with the player, so that way the zone will move with it as well. So now if we go to our cylinder and now simulate physics that's on this thing, let's go ahead and jump down here and hit play. The flashlight drops. Whoa. We got some craziness going on there. But technically, there is our there is our flashlight. So, let's modify a few things here now. So let's go back under our flashlight. Let's go to our child actor. And under default, we're going to scroll down. There are some things you do not want to change here under the blueprint that are exposed that normally aren't when you pull something in there. So be careful if you edit anything to be sure on what you're editing. But let's go down under Snapshot, and this is normal here. So we'll just enable Snapshot, and we're going to use Snapshot Basic, and we're going to keep, we'll drag this over, we'll keep the snapshot shadows on because we always want this filter to be applied. And that should be basically it. Now all we need to do is adjust the shadow threshold. We can keep pulling that down so we can see over here in our level, if I can get this screen here. Okay. So now we can play with this value here, and if we keep dragging this down, you'll notice in our level here, we'll start to get a look on our light. Let's try 60. Let's try 53. 60 looked pretty good. So there we go. Now we can compile and save this. We can blow that back up now. Let's go and take a look at this here. So now this light should be optimized to where it'll keep that filter on there, but when your player is far enough away from it, like way over here, let's go ahead and turn on the debug zone here. And now, if you go ahead and see our light, it's got that, the dynamic shadows are on, it's got that filter still on it. If we go and try and kick this around a little bit, whoa. But essentially that flashlight is, the dynamic shadows are off on the flashlight right now. But when I get closer to it, it turns the dynamic shadows back on the flashlight. So if the flashlight is in the scene, but there's no player by it, it can save on resources like that as well. And that's how you add the Smartlight system to the blueprint instead of doing it the other way around. But like I said, the downfall with this method is now when we go and click on our actual flashlight, we cannot expose the parameters here of the child blueprint. We don't have the setup zones or any of those features. They all need to be set in the blueprint itself. But like I said, this is okay because once this is set, this is good to go. and the flashlight is essentially ready. So the last thing that I want to touch base on here real quick is for creative lighting effects that you can drag a light into your scene. In this case, we just set the attenuation radius to about 500. Let's give that a color. Let's say that that is more of a yellow color, like that. And if we go and take the check out of only disable shadows, and we scroll down and set up skip auto LODs. So what that's going to do is it's going to make sure that there's only the two-step process, that it'll immediately go to its full size when you get close to it. Otherwise, that there'll be a stage that'll be in between. Now back in the demo map, you can see how these lighting effects have been achieved over here just by using the distance effect and making sure that to shut off the skip the LODs. So that way it makes sure that it's just a smooth process right into it. I want to thank every single person that has supported this project from day one. And this is version 3.0. In the future, there's going to be a version 4.0, and the system's only going to get better and better and better. So thank you again, and I hope I covered the majority of this system and how to properly use it. All right, thanks again.